We're heading to APAC now for their Deloitte chapter, moderated by Hayley, Head of Partnerships APAC at Mambu. Hayley, the floor is yours.
Welcome to Mambu Summit Chapters, and we're here at Deloitte Day, the APAC segment. I'm sitting here with David Myers, Banking and Capital Markets Leader for Australia here at Deloitte.
Hayley, thank you for having me. I'm glad to host you, and I'm glad to be part of the Mambu Summit.
Excellent. So you've been with Deloitte for quite some time and spent a lot of time over in Europe. However, Australia is fresh and new for you, isn't it?
It is indeed. I guess a bit of itchy feet, supposedly. I grew up in California, and when I started work off in San Francisco, someone asked anyone interested to go overseas, and I said, sure, why not? And next thing you know, I was living in Switzerland and fell in love with being in Europe, fell in love with working in financial services, and just never made it back. So I've grown up working with a lot of financial institutions over my career, moved from Switzerland and landed in London, which became home for a few decades, mostly looking after the large US and European banks, but also market infrastructure. And when I was asked, would I be interested to come to Australia, I thought, what a perfect combination of my California roots and a little bit of London heritage. Still learning all the lingo, lots of acronyms, lots of new words, but I'm very excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, it's an absolute privilege to have you on the show today. And in terms of myself, I head up partnerships for Mambu APAC, and to sort of give you a sense of our discussion topics today, what we're going to go through is the future of banking, as well as what can banks do now. For nearly 100 years, the banking industry stood still. Protected by regulation, the industry saw very little need for change. However, that has changed dramatically in the past 10 years and accelerated in the past 5, especially here in APAC. We saw significant market disruption and new business models being introduced, led by the Chinese big tech firms such as Tencent and Alipay, making super apps the norm here in Asia. We then saw banking regulators across the region racing to issue digital banking licenses, introducing long-awaited competition into an otherwise stagnating industry. The combined forces of technology and business changes have propelled banks to digitize and, in some cases, acquire new digital ventures to fend off the competition. Much of the discussion today has been centered around the need for banks to improve their digital engagement, especially during COVID, when some of the mobile and internet banking channels were tested at breaking points. As we emerge from a flurry of COVID lockdowns, the tech modernization has finally reached fever point, and boards and investment committees no longer object to their infrastructure as well as their applications being put into a cloud environment. So hooray for all of us living and breathing in the cloud-native SaaS world. Whilst we celebrate our post-lockdown freedom, many of us must ask, what is in there for the future? What is the next chapter of innovation? And how can banks now prepare for change? So Dave, with that question and many, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Hayley. Well, you've hit on quite a few points there in your introduction, and so firstly, I think COVID probably overstated by many, but COVID has been an accelerator on the digital journey for lots of industries, but particularly in financial services. I think people found the fact that you couldn't go out and leave your home, and therefore still needed to carry on, conduct business, whether that was at a consumer or a corporate level, needed to carry on. And so you mentioned the point of putting a lot of strain and stress on the infrastructure and the applications. Absolutely true. So it's sped up the focus from the boards and the management that they need to do something about it. And some have, some I think are still pondering what to do. And what's really clear though is that we're in a new world, the new expectations. If you bring together what and how we operate just in our own retail banking lifestyle, I buy goods online, clothes, shoes, sporting equipment, whatever. I expect to be able to do that in the banking world. I want it to be hyper-personalized to my needs. What am I interested in? I don't want to be, no disrespect, getting information about you and what you're interested in. I want it to be about me. So banks need to develop more intense, hyper-personalized services and capabilities that are focused around my lifestyle. What do I need to get done? What am I concerned about? What am I anxious about? How can the bank take that anxiety off of me? So I think that's been very much at the forefront of now those thinking about this and how they can do it differently. You mentioned the cloud. Absolutely. I think that's still been a challenge for some regulators to get their head around whether or not it's going to be acceptable. In some cases, there is still, I think, questions, but I think it's slowly becoming acceptable, and acceptable not just in a private but a public cloud. And as I always said, if you're willing to purchase certain goods from large named organizations and put your personal details into their cloud, I think they've proven out that that's possible. So there's a variety of cloud vendors out there that support this. I think in terms of going forward, that coming back to it, it's hyper-personalization, it's creating an efficient model, it's all about simplification. And what do I mean by that? It's taking the gobbledygook financial language out of it. Customers don't understand that. Speak to them in English or Mandarin or whatever language that you're choosing, but speak to them in human beings and things that they understand. That's what it's all about. So as I look forward and I see how things are evolving, most definitely data is playing a key part in this. More efficient risk models is being a key part of it. Ecosystem plays, partnering up, working with other organizations, a recognition by the more mature, more forward-thinking institutions realize they don't have to own and operate everything. Teaming up with others is actually going to be more helpful. And back to that point of that hyper-personalization, it's about what I call the jobs to be done. What do I as a consumer need to get done? It's not just purely I want to put a deposit in or take a loan out. It's here's a lifestyle. I'm thinking about my future of my family. I'm thinking about my career. How do I facilitate that? I'm worried about my health. How can I embed my banking and my health, my banking and my telco purchases, my banking and my pets, my auto, and. So having that ability to bring that all together and treat that as an entire customer journey is where this is all leading. So those who can think about it that way, those that can present solutions and offerings in that way, and to get away from here's a loan product, here's a savings product. That's where I think we're going.
Fantastic. I think that's definitely what many of us would expect out of banks more so than anything else, isn't it? So would you see new business models emerging in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years? And what do you think those business models could be?
Well, as I already mentioned, I think there's definitely a shift away from a product-driven banking model. So no longer is it just here's a set of rates that we'll offer you based on the deposits you make, or here's a set of loans that we'll provide, here's the standard way in which we deal with collateral, and. It's instead looking at more of that ecosystem that I referenced. Mm-hmm. What is the customer trying to do, both again at the individual consumer level, but also at that corporate level? What are they trying to achieve? Is it about at the corporate? Is it I'm expanding my market space out of Australia into the rest of Asia Pac? Yeah. How and where will I play? We clearly have in the background of all of this, and very thematic today as COP26 is kicking off in Glasgow, a real interest and real focus, maybe for the first time, it's serious, it's real, we've got to do something about our climate. So how do I build that into my offerings and my services as a bank? So that kind of modeling and that structure, again, the ecosystem and not going it alone, but partnering with others to help you and realizing sharing and teaming up is the best way forward. That's the model that I think we're going to see going forward. And again, there are a few institutions that I've seen already in Australia embracing this. Some of the incumbents have already teamed up in the healthcare space, in the telco space, and so forth. And I think to some degree that's listening to their customers, some degree maybe spurred on by some of the new entrants, particularly in the buy now, pay later space,
Yes.
who are forcing a different way of thinking,
Yes.
which isn't about financial services as much as it's a marketing, and it's almost an element of bringing a consumer base to life, and a lifestyle and a mindset and everything. And that's what I think the banks now are trying to recognize and take advantage of themselves. But they can't do it by themselves. They need a team and work with others.
That's really insightful. I mean, the conversation around embedded finance is very much born out of that concept, isn't it? Partnering and also extending themselves to service a broader customer base as well as broader financial services offerings overall. So how do you think banks can prepare for the next wave of innovation right now? What can they do right now to help them succeed?
Well, I think it's going to vary bank to bank, and some of them, I think, unfortunately, are still weighed in issues of siloed infrastructure, a little bit still caught in the past way of thinking that they need to own and control and operate everything themselves. I think those that are a bit more forward thinking are recognizing that they need to go through and be very aggressive in changing their transformational programs to embrace how do we get more out of our data, both data that we've captured and brought in, but also data that we can collect elsewhere. You mentioned WeBank and Alipay in the beginning, and they've been very, very clever about collecting as much information in so many different sources, so they get the most comprehensive view of their customer.
Yes.
And so they're able to do much more quicker credit assessments and review of suitability of the product for their customer. That's that recognition of data and how powerful it is. So firstly, banks need to sort their data out. And they need to get that down to an understanding of the transactional data that's coming through, but also the computational data that they hold. Being able to rely on that and provide those insights and understandings about what is the customer we should be going after, the demographics, the services that we're looking at, what are the needs that they have. And again, back to my hyper-personalization point, how do I build an offering that is suitable for that individual and feels it's just for that individual. So that's number one. Number two is I think it's looking at those traditional technology stacks that exist. And some have been in place for decades. I'm sure there's even code somewhere in the world that still exists that I did in one or two of these banks, because it's just, once it gets in, it's so hard to remove.
It is.
So I think looking and understanding, what's the path that we're going to do and take that forward. We talk about at Deloitte building on the edge. So it's very difficult, I think, for some of the incumbents to look and see, well, look at these new entrants coming in. They've got a green field. We don't have a green field. We have a brown field. How are we going to transform our brown field? So part of that is having the right mindset, the right visionaries, and the people that have the technical skills to understand how do I build on the edge of my existing infrastructure and start to eat my way through to replace that with more modern, more componentized solution sets that allow me the flexibility then to, back to my point, provide new services, new capabilities quickly and efficiently.
That actually resonates with the Mambu philosophy really well. It's all about mastering your own data and then also modernize it in a manageable kind of way, not going at the whole chunk of the bank in one go, but like you said, modernize on the edge and going through that greenfield, brownfield transformation journey.
Indeed, I think, again, using the language of DevOps and Agile, it's what's your minimal viable product that you can produce, get that out there, build on that, get to the next one, get to the next one, get to the next one. So again, moving away from let's do a big bang, everything's perfect.
Absolutely.
I think that's become very costly. I don't think people see a return that they can reinvest in and continue the development life cycle. I think also the world moves on. You need to have that nimble ability to shift and change a little bit as you see and develop and get better insights. And the more that you can, I guess, present and put something in place early on, you can test it with your customers, get your feedback, make the modifications, and move on to the next and the next and the next.
Absolutely. And what about in terms of building that technological foundation? Because a lot of what we're talking about goes all the way back to technology, right? So how can they build that foundational layer to allow them to be prepared for change in the future?
Well, I think the way that we've been approaching this is recognizing that there's a number of fundamental points of your architecture. So you can have an abstract architecture, if you will, or a logical architecture that sets out what are the key elements from onboarding to banking and payments and effectively sunsetting clients, and understanding what those pieces are, and then recognizing that that doesn't need to be done in one big monolithic system anymore. Back to your point of being able to develop it in the cloud, make it cloud native, makes things a lot easier for change, for scaling, and so forth. And I suppose I've always looked at this in a very simplistic view of Lego blocks. So going back to my childhood, and at least even playing with my kids, the idea of you've got your green mat, you've got your yellow, red, and blue blocks, and those are all the foundation pieces. And I guess a plug for Mambu, I see Mambu as being one of those foundation pieces. It's got a lot of the core piece elements that's required, taking deposits, lending, facilitating the payments, and so forth. And that should come relatively quick and easy for any institution to stand up a new capability. What we want to talk about, back to my Lego, is this a Batman? Is it a Wonder Woman? Is it a Star Wars theme? Or whatever. That's what we want to focus on. That's where the competition will really come down to. And the quicker one can get to that point, that's where you can distinguish yourself. In banking terms, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to some very basic things that the banks need to be able to do. They need to be able to manage their data very efficiently, and that means understanding what the customer wants, getting insights to the customer, through to using that data for risk management and credit and so forth. A lot of the other stuff is actually quite commoditized.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
And there's no need to do a lot of that reinvention and build it from scratch. And again, that was sort of the philosophy that we've taken in trying to develop our own capabilities in-house, of which Mambu is a huge component of what we refer to as our alpha platform or alpha solution, which is looking at those 25, 30 odd key components that you need to assemble to provide a bank end-to-end. Mambu's right in the center there is that banking platform. And there's a handful of others that provide things such as onboarding through to CRM and so forth. So bringing that all together quickly and efficiently then lets you focus on the differences. And that's going to be back to the data and the insights, providing additional features, plugging into those ecosystem partners, and so forth.
Absolutely. It all goes back to your original point about hyper-personalization. Having something that is robust, lean, and very much the enabler for the banks, and allowing the banks to innovate around it and build something truly unique that is geared especially for their customers, right? Going for the cohort of one is essentially what we're talking about.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I don't think it makes a lot of sense to build stuff that you can buy readily and configure. And I think configuring it and using it as it comes out of the box, that's usually the most successful way in which I've seen third-party solutions be enabled. And then focus on the wrapper, focus on the differentiator.
Amazing. So today is also Melbourne Cup Day. So if we were to put a few bets on in terms of which horse is going to capture the impending opportunities that's going to come at them in the banking sector, what would you put your money on?
Well, I wonder if it's going to be a photo finish amongst a few players. I would not write off the incumbent banks.
Okay.
I think there's a number of them that are making striving steps forward in terms of wanting to transform. We also need to recognize that they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. You did talk about regulation at the beginning. I don't think that's going to go away. Yeah. Regulation is here. It will continue. We're seeing, I guess from my experience of having worked in Europe for a number of years, they continue to roll out new regulation. I'm seeing that wave continue to hit Asia Pac as well. Mm-hmm. It's about trying to protect the consumer. Yes, there's some unintended consequences that come time with that, but being able to deal with that regulation is not something to forget. We've seen that around AML, KYC, and the fact and fraud. Yeah. And so capabilities that are existing already and the know-how to deal with that is very important. I've seen a few new startups or new entrants get caught out because they don't appreciate the facilities that you have to put in place or the complexities that exist behind that. So it really is more about can those incumbents move quickly enough?
Yes.
And can they change culturally in terms of how do you go about developing and rolling out that? So I think that's definitely one to watch. I think there's definitely going to be a influx of new entrants. Maybe they're backed by private equity. Maybe it's backed by a consortium. I think the idea that I understand is that there's a lot of dormant banking licenses that are spread apart various countries, and people are looking to take advantage of those and revitalize. So again, I saw this happen in the UK in a number of instances. So it's a useful approach to move more quickly because getting a banking license can take some time. So if one is able to secure one and use that as the launching pad to introduce a new capability, that's important. It'll come down though, I think ultimately, in terms of how and who wins in these, what is their proposition actually all about? What's the demographic they're going after? How quickly and how safely they can roll that out, and giving end customers confidence in what they're getting and seeing. And I think, again, my crystal ball, if I could put one more thing in there, is it's possible we see a shift and a change in the leaders of these organizations too. And that is, historically we've seen CEOs of banks grow up either from being the CFO or running a business unit within the bank. Given that attention to that hyper-personalization, given that attention to the look and feel and how it affects me as a consumer, could the next CEO come from the chief marketing officer's role?
Oh, that's a big call. Big call. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your insight today. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to be able to speak to you at Mambu Summit Chapters.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.